"Oh, sorry, you've got to go and meet Ron Dennis. He wants to do your interview." The first thing he said, "Are you any good?" "Yeah, I'm all right." And he's like, "Okay, there's cameras everywhere. Don't up." Suddenly looking at what I did with Kimi, there was such a big emphasis on the recovery. So we had a cryo chamber in his house.
Hi, I'm Mark Priestley. I spent 10 years working at the McLaren Formula One team with the likes of Lewis Hamilton, Kimi Raikkonen, Fernando Alonso, Mika Hakkinen. But those are just the drivers. I also worked with amazing people behind the scenes. Adrian Newey, Ron Dennis. They all taught me valuable lessons that I now know are not just applicable to Formula One. My mission with this podcast is to help you to think more like a Formula One team might think about the challenges you might face in life, on a personal level, on a business level, being a parent, social challenges that you face. I hope you'll take away some valuable lessons that will help you on your own journey towards high performance. Welcome to Pitlane Life Lessons. On today's show, I'm delighted to say that I've got someone with a huge amount of experience in Formula One, but even more than that, he's one of my best mates. He was also, in fact, best man at my wedding. But the bit we're going to talk about today is the fact that he's been a performance coach in this sport for 28 years. He's worked with 3 world champions, 5 different Formula One teams, and attended almost 450 different Grand Prix. That's crazy. But it means he's got some great advice, much of which he shares in today's conversation. Details of how those 3 world champions achieved success in very different ways via their different mentalities. And also, if you ever travel with work or even for social, you might want to stay listening right to the very, very end, because some very useful tips on how to stay hydrated and feeling fresh when you get to the other end. Mark, thanks so much for joining me on the show. Real pleasure to have you. I've been trying to do this for a long, long time. There's so much I want to cover with you today, but I'm going to start by getting a little brief overview of your journey into Formula One, because it wasn't really something you set out in life to try and achieve, was it? You stumbled across it. So tell us how you got there, and then I want to get into what you found when you arrived.
Yeah, sure. I mean, number one, great we managed to get together for this. So Formula One, like I say, was never a sport I was trying to get into. I think the things that appealed to me about Formula One was actually the travel element of it. And I was working in the University of Surrey in the sports department there. I had my own sports injuries clinic. I was working with all of the scholarship students, some of the guys in the British athletics team, some of the guys in the England rugby team. And I also taught climbing. And there was a guy that just came in for a climbing lesson, finished the lesson, he came in to pay in my clinic, and he was like, "Oh, what happens in here?" And I said, "Oh, look, this is my main job. I just do the climbing as a bit of an add-on." And he was working for McLaren, setting up a human performance lab, and said, "Look, we're looking for a sports therapist to come in and work with drivers. Would you be interested?" And I was like, maybe, not really.
Were you hesitant at first?
Yeah, well, was I hesitant? Not really. I mean, it was a fantastic opportunity. And I just got a contract to work with some physios at the Wimbledon tennis tournament for that year. And that coincided with the Magny-Cours race. I knew that was going to be a bit of an issue. But I spoke to him. He said, "Look, come and work with DC, come and work with Mika, do a bit of work with them both. And so long as they have no objections to what you're doing, come to Australia for the first race." So yeah, I went to Australia for the first race.
That was a whirlwind.
It was a whirlwind, yeah.
How long from meeting that guy in the gym to...
Months.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, it was super quick. I mean, I liked the project because I think at that particular time, there weren't many trainers in Formula One. It was quite a new thing to bring that side of things up to where it could be. So I liked the vision. And yeah, like I say, I think it helped. Formula One wasn't something that I ever really wanted to be involved in, but then as soon as I went there, it was an amazing experience.
Well, what did you find when you got there? Because as you said, that side of things was relatively new. So, you know, from the driver's perspective, as Mika Hakkinen and David Coulthard at McLaren at the time, were you working with both?
Yep.
What was their reaction to you turning up? Were they immediately open and really pleased that the team were taking these steps, or was there some hesitation from their side?
There wasn't really a hesitation. I worked with DC way more at the beginning. So the first 3 races in Australia, David had a back problem. I fixed it. He won the race. And so it set it off on a good start. I wasn't doing so much with Mika in the first 3 races. So we did Australia, Brazil, Argentina.
And what was that? Just through his choice, or because he didn't need as much treatment? Or?
I was looking after him in the garage. So I did all of the garage stuff for him and the track stuff. I think he had his own people around him. but not at the track. So I don't know exactly what the situation was with access for them. I think Ron got involved, and so I did the Mika stuff at the track. I did the DC treatment side of things, and then we got to Europe, and Mika just out of the blue came up to me and said, "Oh, can you come and do some work with me?" I said, "Yep, sure, no problem." And then he asked me to be his trainer. He said, "Would you be my trainer?" I'm like, "Yeah, okay, why not?"
Is that a permanent role at that point?
Yeah, I mean, I was contracted to do every race.
Right.
So I think when Mika asked that, I'm like, okay, now I have to make a big decision because I can't do all of these races. Mika wanted me in Monaco
to do Monaco.
Yeah, to do all the training with him.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, I can't carry on running a clinic. I have responsibilities to the people I'm looking after there. Things were going in the right direction for me with the Wimbledon sort of thing and with the athletes I was working with. But I thought, okay, why not? It's an opportunity to do something completely different. I enjoyed working at the races, and moved to Monaco, moved into Mika's spare bedroom with his pet tortoise, Carolina, until I found my own place to live. So yeah, like I said, that was really the start. And then from that point, I gave up the clinic in the UK because, as you know, from F1, I was just never there.
Yeah.
But I got, so I had to do an interview with Ron. So I think that was probably the one thing basically before I went to Australia. I was told, you've got to go and meet Ron Dennis. He wants to do your interview. And I didn't know Ron. I didn't know what he was like.
Wow, he doesn't do many interviews,
no,
does he?
He didn't. So, that's what I understood.
Yeah.
And then people started telling me about him, and I was like,
that's probably the worst thing to do before you go into
exactly. Interview. But he basically sort of dragged me into his office, and the first thing he said, "Are you any good?" Yeah, I'm all right. And he's like, "Okay, there's cameras everywhere. Don't up." and that was basically, and then he told someone to McLarenize me.
That's brilliant. That was the interview.
Yeah, pretty much.
That quick, unbelievable.
And I was in there maybe, I don't know, 4 or 5 minutes. And,
that's incredible.
But it's an interesting start.
Wow. So that was a real game changer, and I mean a life changer for you, because it started this journey of 26 years
28
now?
years
28
now.
years now.
Yeah.
On a path that you did not expect to go down. But as you said, you took it because it was a great opportunity. And part of that opportunity, I'm sure, was because this idea of human performance was relatively new in Formula One. So I guess the scope for improvement and developing that side of things was huge. And that opportunity was all yours at that point.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I worked as part of a small team. There was obviously the trainer, a guy called Jerry, that worked with DC. So it was the two of us really running all of that. And we could really create whatever we wanted. So it was a great platform to develop these things and do things that just weren't being done in sort of many of the teams in F1.
And what wasn't being done? So what were the biggest opportunities? I guess the biggest side from your background at the time, it was generally physical. What were the biggest opportunities in terms of what were these elite athletes, as in Formula One drivers? I mean, were they elite athletes back then? That's the first question.
It's a really good question. I think that whole fitness side of things at the time wasn't so apparent. I think Michael started it.
Yeah, Schumacher.
Yeah, I think he was the one with Technochim that really pushed those limits. And I think people saw that and thought, hang on a minute, we're missing a beat here.
Yeah.
If he's doing it and he's that good, why aren't we doing it? And I think coming from that fitness background, working with sort of the athletes, I knew there was a lot that could be done in that sort of side as well. So I think looking at the setup at the time, what do you want to focus on? Okay, number one, the physical side of things. Are these guys fit enough? The cars at the time, I mean, 97, huge sort of tyres.
Yeah.
What was it, V12 engine?
Yeah.
Super quick. The obvious physical parts from the drive performance, you got the neck, but all of these other stabilizing muscles that no one had really worked on before. The position in a car like this, you've got everything so flexed in that position, and they're working very internally here. No one had ever really looked at what's happening with the opposite side of the body, what's happening with the back.
Yeah.
So if you want to prevent injuries, you really want to create a situation where you balance the body. Left foot braking, you get so much load going through the left foot, and then the right foot's just doing this. So you get that asymmetrical load in the pelvis, which causes problems with the lower back.
Yeah.
So there were lots of these issues at the time that weren't really understood. So you had the physical side, you had the injury prevention side of things, getting rid of all of those asymmetries. Then you have nutrition and hydration, which weren't really understood. And to be perfectly honest, in those days, compared to where we are now, we have so much more of an understanding of all of these different things. So like I say, we were learning and developing things that then, as the science developed, we would incorporate other things into. So it was a nice sort of platform to develop and be part of.
Yeah, and you got buy-in from, you didn't it up. So Ron bought into this and realised that there was a performance advantage here to be had. So did he give you the support you needed?
Yeah, he did. I mean, I think the one thing with Ron is he was a brilliant team manager or team principal. If he saw any way to improve performance, he would go for that. And yeah, from my side, he was always super supportive of anything that was going to help the drivers perform better. Yeah,
good. And then, what's happened over that period of time that you've been in the sport is that obviously everything's evolved and you're still very much involved, and the physicality of preparing a driver has been a huge part of your career. But it has evolved a lot in that time, in that, as you just touched on there, things like nutrition has become a huge part of it. I'm imagining things like looking after their sleep routines, and even more so their mentality. The driver's, mindset is a massive component of what performance they're able to deliver. So how much did your job change into that sphere, and how easy a transition was that for you?
Number one, you're right. I think things just develop and change, and we understand more about the human body, and certain things that you sort of spoke about there, like the recovery side of things, the sleep side of things. I think at that particular time, like in the late 90s, we didn't understand how important sleep was. And as part of a recovery process, certainly looking at what I did with Kimi, there was such a big emphasis on the recovery. So we had a cryo chamber in his house.
Wow.
And so we would use the cryo chamber. We had infrared saunas. We had all sorts of different things that would help from a recovery point of view. We focused on the sleep side of things.
What's the cryo chamber doing for the recovery process?
It's more, number one, really cold, down to minus 125, 130 degrees. It's really just a recovery tool. If you think of submerging in an ice bath after exercise, it's kind of like taking that to the next level.
Okay.
So we would use that after training, after the race weekends, after testing, if we did the testing, just as part of that recovery process. At the races, I'd take the little sort of eye-body sort of cooling tub to some of the hotter races. So I'd fill that with the cold water, with the ice, more just to bring down core body temperature. And sort of, it was more that than it was anything else. But
because that's obviously become a kind of a craze that swept the nation, and everyone's got one at home now.
I know. The crazy thing is I used to carry one around a Formula One paddock, and everyone used to laugh at me carrying this little blue thing on my shoulder. And then wait a couple of years, and then everyone started using them, which was great because, like I say, they are beneficial. But like I say, we've had this development, if you like, from the recovery side of things. I think with the mental side of things, I think what's great is people have a much bigger awareness, not just in Formula One, but in life in general, of mental health. And I think in any sport, it's important. I don't know, you look at football, for example, watching the England football team, and it would come to penalties, and you're like, what's going to happen? I think if you look at England playing in the last Euros with the penalties against Switzerland, it was like, my God, these guys are amazing. And how do you create that? You work with psychologists, you work on that particular area of the game to make sure you're good at it. So when you get to that situation, there are no what ifs. You know exactly what you've got to do, and anything can happen on that particular night. But
is that what you put that? So the football example there was a great one. But is that what you, when you're watching that, that's what you're thinking? These guys are now mentally prepared for this.
100%, yeah. And it's funny because people sort of sometimes say to me, "Okay, look, you've been on the grid with Mika twice against Michael, 98, 99. last race of the season decides the championship.
Yeah.
How do you calm a driver down? What do you say? And it's like, you never leave it to the last race. I mean, there are always going to be nerves in an event like that. And but I think, how do you kind of prepare a driver for that? How do you look at these sort of things from an athletic point of view? If you're working with an athlete, you come up with a plan at the beginning of the season.
Yeah.
And I think in Formula One, especially, like, as you know, going back into the late 90s, early 2000s, a Formula One engine was designed to last one race.
Yeah.
And quite often it didn't.
Yeah, that's true.
So we would sort of think at the beginning of the year, okay, look, we've got a season of what might have been 15, 16 races at the time. We know that engine's probably going to pop in 2 or 3 of them.
Yeah.
So that's 2 or 3 races that we know are going to go wrong. Driver error, you can't rule it out. At some point, you're going to make a mistake under pressure, maybe. So that's you put 1 down to that, and a driver might take you out because of their mistake.
Yeah.
So out of 15 races, we already expect 4 or 5 to be not what we want, i.e. we're not going to win.
Compromised, yeah.
So if you go with a mentality that that is the situation from the outset of the season, as soon as you get a race where the engine pops, you don't freak out about it. It's like, hang on, this was actually part of the plan. We knew this was going to happen.
Yeah.
So mentally, it doesn't affect you as negatively as, oh my God, the engine's popped. Is this going to affect our championship?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, in the same way, go back to that football analogy, they didn't prepare for those penalties in the 5 minutes they had to, at the end of the game, end of the 90 minutes, did they? They prepared for them way before that, because they knew it was a possibility.
Yeah.
I think I can think about, from a pit stop perspective, where we used to practice for things like failures, where things go wrong in a pit stop. And it's the same thing. You don't want to be panicking in the moment because it's an unfamiliar situation. It feels like the end of the world. We know that there's a possibility that the front jack could fail, or the car could come in with a puncture, for example. You can't get the jack under the front wing. So you prepare for those things.
Yep.
And it is about being mentally secure enough to know that that isn't the end. That's not a full stop at the end of it. It's just a sort of comma in this process, and you keep going. And if you're prepared for it, you can keep going in a much better way. So I guess the sort of this idea of keeping the driver calm in those big moments, you talked about the final day of the season. I understand the idea of preparing that you're going to have races that things go wrong. So you can think about that at the start of the season. And when they do go wrong, I mean, yes, you're in some extent prepared because you've talked about it. But there must be a moment, the Sunday night after a bad race, when even with that preparation, the driver is still feeling, because I've been there, we've all been there, you're still feeling pretty low. What practically could you do or say with a driver to try and pick him back up again? Yeah,
I think there's lots of different things to unpack in what you just asked.
Guys, I hope you're enjoying the conversation so far. If you can take a very quick moment to like, subscribe, follow, leave me a comment or a 5-star rating, I would really appreciate it. It makes a massive difference to the podcast.
Because number one, it's what has caused that in the first place. With drivers, as you well know, if they're the ones that have made the mistake, it's a lot harder to deal with than if the engine's popped, if the car's failed. I mean, we've had it. Mika, last lap in Barcelona, 2000, I think. 2000. Can't remember. Coming up the hill, gearbox, basically, or clutch melted.
That's right.
Never made it to the end of the race leading. Kimi, Nürburgring, 2005.
That one very well.
Suspension failed. So you have these sort of situations, and I think it also then depends on the individual, because Kimi was one of these characters that was just very good at forgetting what had just happened. It's like, it was a race. If it didn't go well, whether it was mechanical or whether it was him, he'd be pissed off at the time. But then by the evening, he's like, it's done. It's finished. Let's move on. And I thought that was one of his massive strengths. He had this ability to not think back, not regret. It's kind of, this is what's happened, and now I move on to the next one.
Did you ever get to the bottom of what was underlying there? What was behind that? Is it something that was just inherent in him, or is it something that, for the benefit of those listening, sounds like a wonderful place to be and a wonderful skill to have? Is it a skill? Can we develop it?
It's a very good question. I mean, I think it is a developable skill, for sure. It's hard. I think what's difficult to comprehend with athletes in general is how much work goes into changing something like this. I mean, I was listening to something with Roger Federer the other day, and he said in his entire career, how many points?
I saw that clip.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
I mean, he won like 54% of the points he played. and he was the world's best. So he didn't win 40 whatever percent, 46. Thank you.
It's breaking it down, isn't it? Those small margins and seeing a bigger picture.
Exactly.
That's the point, isn't it?
And what he said is a point is just a point. Once you play it, it's over and you move on. But how do you get to that point of mentality? If you look back at him in particular, Roger Federer, Bjorn Borg, I mean, two of arguably the greatest tennis players have ever been, both had massive problems with temper when they were young athletes. And they would smash rackets, they'd storm off, they'd have tantrums. And I think their coaches understood that, hang on a minute, we've got to get rid of that, because otherwise that is always going to be a part of their game and it's always going to disturb them. Yeah. So both had to find a way to basically get rid of that anger. And how do you get rid of that? It's a long process. I mean, you look at Roger Federer, have you ever seen him lose his rag on the court?
No.
I can't remember ever seeing once. He kept calm the whole time, which is a skill he's had to learn because it wasn't inherent to him.
Okay.
And when you look at how do you develop that, it's like, can you control your everyday life? How do you control your everyday life? If you're getting up in the morning and you've got kids running all over the house, if it pisses you off and aggravates you and makes you angry, can you control that situation?
So start practicing in those little everyday moments.
Exactly, yeah. You look at those everyday moments. If someone cuts you up on the road in a car, do you instantly react, hit the horn, lose your temper, or do you take a deep breath, think, that's just happened, I'm going to deal with this.
Yeah.
Shit happens. And it's, if you can start controlling your everyday, then you can start controlling these bigger events. If you flip out on all of these other things, how can you expect to control an even more pressurized situation?
Yeah, it's a really good point. And you know, when we at McLaren used to go to Courtenay, the Finnish Olympic Institute in Finland, a lot of the coaches there used to tell us that kind of thing. It's, you know, when you've got an athlete on the start line of a major event like the Olympics, you can't really practice for the emotion in that moment. You can't practice for that because it only happens once every 4 years.
Sure.
And only if you do get to the final will you ever get to experience what that pressure cooker feels like. So exactly that. You practice in the moments that you do have around you, the moments that happen every day that are far less pressurized, but they just get you a little bit more comfortable with a pressurized situation. And I think, you know, what you're saying is in those moments when someone does cut you up, you start to practice and remember that you're practicing maybe taking a deep breath, count to 3, or whatever the method is you choose, do it in those moments. And when the big moment comes, you're a little bit closer to being prepared.
Sure, yeah. And if you look at like things going wrong, the first response is normally negative. And I learned that if something goes wrong, say good. It gives me the opportunity that my flight's been cancelled. And instead of going, my God, this is a nightmare, I think, great, I get to stay an extra night in this country. I get to experience a little bit more. I get to go to my favourite restaurant that I found. There's always two ways to look at it. And I think if something doesn't go right, it's always the negative that comes out first. And if you can turn that into a positive and say, good, gives me the opportunity to do this instead, then that whole mentality tends to change a little bit.
It's a very difficult thing to do, though, isn't it? When you're
it's very difficult.
When your flight has been cancelled, it's the last thing you feel like thinking to yourself.
Sure.
But I guess that comes back to the same thing, doesn't it? Because if you've practiced in those little moments, you're more likely to be able to kick into that same, right, let's take a deep breath, count to 3. And even that counting to 3 or the deep breath can just reset your mind a little bit, lose the red mist, and then you can think a little bit more clearly about whatever the situation is you're facing.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it comes down to controlling what you can control.
Yeah.
There's a lot in a Formula One race that you can never control. But if you can control in any environment what you're capable of controlling, anything else can happen, and that's not controllable. So you shouldn't be worrying about it. There's always a plan for it. So just in case, like a Formula One race, like you described with the pit stop stuff, you have to be prepared for a front wing change. You have to be prepared for all these things. But you cannot control whether that's going to be needed or whether it's going to happen. You can just be in your mind mentally prepared that when it does happen, you're ready. I think.
Well, with the 3 world champions you've worked with, Mika Hakkinen, Kimi Raikkonen and Sebastian Vettel, they've all kind of ticked that biggest box you can tick. They've become world champions. They've sort of, you know, they've done as much as you can do pretty much in the world that they've operated in. did each of them have different approaches to the stuff you just talked about? Was your job much harder with, one over another to manage things like disappointment, for example?
They're all very different characters. And I think, what do they have in common? They're all bloody good Formula One drivers. I think their approaches were all different. Mika, if I start with him, was much more of a mental driver in terms of we spoke a lot about all of this sort of stuff. As the season was going on, looking at different races, what can we improve? If things went wrong, we spoke about it a lot. The sport helped in terms of getting back into that. Visualization was a big thing. So before qualifying with Mika, used to sit him in a dark room, eyes shut in the driving position, and he would just talk me through his perfect lap.
Okay.
And at the end of it, I always used to say, okay, give me a time. And my God, he was always within like a couple of tenths of that. And sometimes you just think, where did that time come from? Because we didn't come anywhere close to that in the practice sessions.
Yeah.
And he had this remarkable ability in qualifying that I thought was just unbelievable. But he was more on that mental side. Whereas Kimi's approach was very different. Kimi was the macro guy. So he didn't want anyone fucking with his head, sort of thing. But he was in control of his emotions. He was in control of himself. He had a very good awareness of what he could do.
I mean, we've heard some radio messages that would suggest otherwise.
We have. That is very true. But as a driver, most of the stuff I did with him was more physical. He was very good at just, like I said to you earlier, forgetting the things that have gone wrong, focusing on going forwards. And he would sort of look at the car and say to the engineer, this is my biggest problem. Get rid of that and I'll make the car go quicker. So it allowed the engineers to really just focus on one thing. And I remember sort of hearing DC's engineer once say, he just described this lap to me and there was a bump in turn 16. It's like, how am I supposed to deal with that? So I think from an engineering point of view, Kimi was probably a little bit easier because Monza, for example, if you could ride the curbs in Monza, especially from Kimi's perspective, you could gain a lot of time. So he would sit down with the engineers and Mark Slade and just say, look, give me a setup that allows me to ride the curbs. And it might mess up certain other areas of the car in the cornering. But having that ability to ride the curbs, he gained like half a second and did things in that car that shouldn't have been possible because he just focused on the biggest problem and tried to correct it. It allowed him to go quicker. So I think he benefited a lot from that sort of, if you like, macro, more simplistic approach. Don't try and go into the details of everything. Whereas Sebastian, super detailed. I mean, literally,
so
complete opposite. Yeah. So he was just looking at every single detail. How can I get incremental gains in every area to try and get the best lap time?
Yeah.
And he was just a workhorse, and that very German mentality of going through everything in detail. So a very different approach. Yeah. And like I say, I think all three approaches worked.
Well, they clearly did.
All world champions. But it was just interesting seeing that side. And I think what was interesting about Kimi was, I think even Sebastian sort of said he was the most naturally talented driver he ever knew. And I would say the same.
Yeah,
of all the drivers I've worked with and seen, Kimi's natural ability was incredible. But if the team had a new part to come in Ferrari, as an example, they put it on Kimi's car because they knew they would get it's shit, get it off, or it's okay, let's work around it. Yeah. Whereas other drivers would say, okay, the wind tunnel says this is 0.3 quicker, we've got to make it work.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think Kimi was very good at understanding, no, crap, or yes, it will work.
So instinctive, would you say, with Kimi?
I think instinctive. He just had that feeling under his ass of what the car was doing.
Yeah.
And it was a very quick feeling. Is this change positive? Is it negative? And it was an instant kind of feeling. And then there was a lot of time that wasn't wasted trying to make something work that was never going to work.
It's really interesting because, as you rightly say, they all achieved the big goal. they all became world champions.
Yeah.
But with very different approaches. And I think what you just said to me, what stands out is that if we take that and transfer it over to the wider context of life, it's the same, isn't it? You can approach everything in life. There's not just one way to get to success.
Yeah.
And I think, with Kimi's approach, I can see the value in that in terms of applying it to life, in that sort out the biggest problems first. And then if you've got spare capacity at the end of that, start drilling down into the finer details, which clearly worked for Kimi. And I think a lot of people are very guilty of trying to figure out the finer details first before they get the basics nailed. But equally, this idea that Seb looked at everything, and I think Lewis is probably very similar, Lewis Hamilton, looking at minute details, in every area, because the ultimate potential of getting all of those right seems enormous, but it requires a very different mentality, in that there's a huge amount of effort and workload, probably sacrifice. There's a huge amount that has to go in to make that approach work, isn't there? Yeah,
for sure there is. And I think, like, from what I understand, I never worked with Michael Schumacher, but I understand he was very much like that as well. And how can you kind of get the people around you to work well and do everything they can to help your performance? I think that's kind of like a more of a team leader kind of mentality, which some drivers have and some drivers don't.
What about the idea of when you're trying to coach and train a driver, and they're obviously not operating on their own. They've got competitors, and sometimes those competitors are in the same team. Your biggest rival can often be your teammate, and it can pose some really tricky dynamics. We've seen it over and over again at multiple different teams and over different years. It very rarely works out that they can still be friends when they're the guy effectively stopping them winning the world title.
Sure.
And you've been in that situation. Mika, as you said, you worked with Mika as a world champion. I know, having worked as part of that team as well, that Mika had some quite clever ways of using his spare capacity in a way that I find fascinating, to not only improve his own performance, but maybe to even affect the performance of his competitors as well.
Yeah, I mean, Mika was like very smart like that. So he was very aware of the lap time he thought he could do. And I'd kneel down by the car and he'd look at me and he's like, I can go 0.3 quicker. But what Mika was very clever at was, on a Friday in the practice sessions, he would go out, get a feel for the car. He'd do sector 1 as quick as he could. Sector 2, he'd back off a little bit, like 0.2 slower, knowing that he could go a little bit quicker. Then he'd put in the final sector quick. And then he'd go around and he'd play around with this. How much can I push? But he'd never do 3 sectors as quickly as he could. Deliberately. And then for the teammate, DC normally at the time, he'd look at Mika's lap time. He's done a 21.0. And that was DC's aim.
That was his benchmark.
Yeah. So David would come and think, okay, I can do a 21.1. I can get that extra tenth. He'd work and get that extra tenth.
Yeah.
And then in qualifying, Mika would put them all together and go half a second quicker. Yeah. And it's and it demoralizes the teammate. Yeah. Like, how the hell's he gone half a second quicker?
It's a deliberate psychological approach that he was thinking about that.
Yeah.
When he was back on the Friday.
Absolutely. Yeah. And like I say, and I think that's one of the things. He always sort of held his cards quite close to his chest. He knew what he could do. Yeah. And I think that sometimes before qualifying, when I sat him down in the room and he said this lap time that we'd never done in sort of practice, that's where it came from, because he kind of put all that together. And then also, when you're putting that whole lap together in all 3 sectors, you're going to gain just from the fact you're going to go flat out in all those sectors. So he could gain a lot just from that. But it was that kind of like, how can I make sure I know what I can do in the car without showing my teammate what I can do in the car, to give him a false benchmark of what he needs to aim at.
What a fascinating approach. And I can't ever imagine Kimi thinking to those levels. He wouldn't be interested in
he'll go as quick as he could.
Yeah.
I mean, because he just wants to go as quick as he can. And he wants to know what the car's capable of.
I mean, the Mika Hakkinen approach it relies on a huge amount of self-belief. You need to know and have total belief that you can deliver something extraordinary when it really matters. And I wonder what the idea of self-belief, how that's kind of manifested itself with different drivers, because all of us have self-doubts at times. Yep. Having worked with Kimi myself, I can't ever think of a situation where I've seen him show any sort of element of self-doubt. But you worked with him a lot more closely and away from the racetrack. Did you ever see things like that in any of the drivers?
I think, number one, everyone, whether it's an athlete, a driver, anyone in everyday life, you always go through these self-doubts. And I think there's certain things that can help with that, like putting yourself in a situation that's way outside your comfort zone will teach you that you can adapt and deal with these sort of situations.
So doing that deliberately as a kind of practice regime.
Honestly, if I take we'll come back to what you just mentioned in a second, but if I look at myself, what do I think gave me the biggest advantage on something like that? I used to work at in the University Sports Centre, and I got told one day that I had to teach aerobics coming up to the following sort of start of the new year. And I'm like, aerobics? I mean, I don't know anything about aerobics. I don't know how to count music. I mean, I don't want to do all this in front of a load of women. I mean, how do I deal with that? So I got put on an aerobics course and had to learn how to teach aerobics. And I remember getting up on stage petrified in a head mic and a unitard with all this music.
I mean, please tell me you got some pictures.
I can't find any.
Yeah, right.
But I had 100+ women per class, 4 times a week for an hour. I loved it. I was nervous before each one because am I going to remember all the moves? I had to write all of the moves down on the front of the stage in case I forgot. But it was such a buzz. But I would never have done it if someone hadn't forced me to do it. And I looked
put you into the uncomfortable situation.
And I was young at the time. So I think, like I say, you sometimes have to go through those sort of situations to realise, actually, I can deal with this, and prove to yourself you can deal with it.
Yeah. Do you know, someone once said to me, sorry to branch off again, but someone once said to me in a similar context, pushing yourself into those really awkward and uncomfortable situations is such a good learning tool. And one of the ways they said that this person did it was they, once a week or once a month or whatever, they'll go into like a bar and order a pint and ask for a discount. And they said they force themselves to ask for, like, no one's going to give you a discount on a pint of lager, but having the conversation is really awkward. It's really weird because the barman's going to go, what are you talking about? But having that little negotiation of trying to get yourself, you know, may not succeed, but it's going through that uncomfortableness and then being comfortable with being uncomfortable is what trains you, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, absolutely.
All right, where were we? We're talking about this idea of self-belief and the differences between the 3 world champions. As I said, it's not a side that we very often get to see with any elite athlete because they tend to only show the side of real confidence.
Sure.
But there must be elements of that where they have self-doubt.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's normal and it's natural. And I think self-belief is massively important. If you don't believe you're capable of winning, if you cannot see yourself on the top step of the podium, if you cannot see yourself as an athlete crossing the finish line first, it's actually very difficult to get in that position because something's going to be mentally holding you back, especially if you're competing against people that have that self-belief.
Or even if you think they have.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I think that's where the Olympics is fascinating to watch, and the different dynamics between certain athletes. Josh Kerr went to that Olympic stadium, stood on that finish line way before the Olympics.
1,500 metres runner.
Exactly. Visualising him winning that race.
Wow.
And he came second. So did he achieve his goal? No, but he knew that he gave the best on that particular night. And you look at his reaction afterwards, and he accepts that if I do my best, that's all I can ask. I executed the race I wanted, but I didn't win. But afterwards, he was comfortable with that situation.
Yeah.
But he had the self-belief beforehand. Noah Lyles, the sprinter, exactly the same. I think from a Formula One driver perspective, to bring it back into the world we know and understand, Mika in 2001 went through, I think, similar sort of things in terms of, can I carry on doing this?
Yeah, that's true.
Can I keep performing at this level? Kimi, very rarely. Kimi didn't say much. He wasn't kind of like, I'm going to win, I'm going to do this. He kept it very much within himself.
I wonder if he did privately, but just wasn't willing to share it.
Maybe. I know that when we were in Ferrari with Felipe, it was close. I mean, some of it comes down to what, from a driver perspective, what you feel you can do in the car. Because Kimi said to me, 2005 McLaren, 2007 Ferrari, I could do anything in those cars. I could put the car where I wanted to put it. I could do anything with them. Yeah. You look at qualifying in Monaco in 2005 between Kimi and Fernando Alonso, and they just constantly went.
Yeah,
and then Kimi threw in that nuts lap at the end that was enough for pole.
Yeah.
It's that self-belief combined with what you feel going on under your ass.
Yeah.
So when we were in Ferrari, Kimi did question, can I actually beat Felipe?
Right.
Maybe I can't. I think his self-belief was there, but it's a question mark. New team, never raced against him before. He is quick. He's been in Ferrari longer.
Yeah.
But
what did you do in that moment as his sort of therapist?
so of course you could beat him.
You just try and build the confidence up.
Yeah, for sure. And like I said, I didn't work so much on that with Kimi because he wasn't so open to it. But I think as soon as he realised, yeah, I can beat him, it was fine. And it was always close between them. But
I mean, sometimes you just do need someone else to tell you. You know, sometimes it can be that simple, can't it? To hear it from somebody else. And I think it's always a really great bit of advice that I would always pass on to anybody, that even if you're feeling confident, some of the people around you, whether it's at work or in your family, even your kids or whatever, sometimes they just need to hear you say, you know, well done, you're doing an amazing job, or you've got this. So, you know, I think it's a great bit of advice that, you know, if you're listening to this, just text somebody, send someone a message, say, look, you're smashing it right now, because it can make a big difference, can't it?
It does, massively. And I think sometimes, like, I think drivers do get a lot of that positive reinforcement, but I think it's important for everyone. And it's amazing how little acknowledgements that you give people make a big difference in their life. What
do you think of the current situation with Lando Norris at McLaren? Because over and over again, we're seeing him at the moment sort of beat himself up post-race when things haven't gone perfectly well. And I always wonder, you know, is that just, if he keeps telling himself this story that he's either not good enough or he's not done well enough, is that seeping into his subconscious somewhere, and will it play out somewhere in the future and affect his performance? Yeah, it's a really interesting one because he's an amazing driver and he's doing an amazing job. He's got a quick teammate. So there's going to be a level of rivalry and competitiveness there, which probably creates a lot of these question marks in their mind that we're talking about now. I'd just love to see him be a bit more kind of like kinder to himself at the end of the race, because he drives some amazing races. And I think the team, looking at where they've been, where they've gone, where they've come back to, they've gone through this amazing transformation, which takes time in Formula One. Andrea Stella, I think, is doing an amazing job. But they need to learn to win again, because they haven't been in that position where all the decisions they make are related to winning Formula One races. And for both of us, having worked there for so long, it's amazing to see it, just because we know a lot of the people. But from a driver perspective, I think once you're in this position of actually being able to win races, you have to go through that sort of phase. And then once you're through it, it becomes like, okay, I've got a car capable of winning, I can win, and I'm going to go and win. But with Lando, I would love to see him sort of, like I say, just be a bit kinder to himself, because he tends to focus a lot on his small mistakes or negatives and not enough on the positives if he did an amazing job. Where do you see the balance with that? Because being openly self-critical is obviously an important part of understanding where you might have gone wrong or where you could improve specifically. But being too much on that side potentially can have a negative impact. For sure, there's always got to be a balance. And where is that exact balance? I think that's very much an individual thing, and is very much related to him and the people around him and how that's kind of navigated. I'd say he's just a little bit too much over that kind of balance point. But maybe it's just a small thing that brings him back in. Maybe it's a confidence thing of things going right in lots of races where he eliminates a lot of these, like not getting away off the line quite quick enough or whatever it might be. Yeah, and I think it's something that we all experience at times, isn't it? When you have something that you've tried really hard at but doesn't quite work out, the immediate response is, well, you know, I was trying really hard and it still didn't work out, so can I actually do it? Yeah, sure. And that's where this sort of lack of self-confidence comes in. But I always believe there's a lot of power in the sort of self-story that you tell yourself. So if you start to tell yourself a story that you may not be good enough, or that there is a bit of, you know, question mark over your performance or your ability, it just seeps in somewhere and emerges at a later date. Whereas if you start to tell yourself the different story, like the one that you said, Josh Kerr, in his response to coming second in the Olympics, when everything was set on getting gold, his response was, well, you know, I did an amazing job today. I actually nailed it. He did everything right. It's just someone else did a slightly better job on that day. On that day, And on another day, that same performance from Josh Kerr will deliver a gold medal winning, you know, performance. So it's understanding that, as you said earlier, You can't control everything, and as long as you do control the bit that you've got control of and you maximise that, you've got to be happy with that.
Yeah, very much so. And I think it comes down to as well, how much are you prepared to work to achieve what you want to achieve? Because on the flip side, no one's going to give you a free pass.
Yeah.
And what goes on behind the scenes, like we watch a 1,500 metre race, and we have no idea what goes on behind the scenes, what these guys have been working towards for the last 4 years.
Yeah.
They have a plan. They have to deal with injuries. They have to deal with the mental side. Races not going right. They have to put in the hours. And we don't see that from an athletics point of view, in the same way everyone watching wouldn't see what happens behind a Formula One team and how much practice goes into certain things. And I think if I relate it back to an example between like Kimi and Sebastian and badminton, these guys, and I think most
they were
athletes
good friends off track as well.
Yeah, very much so. And but they're ultra competitive. I mean, none of these guys want to lose, and no matter what you see them say on TV, they do not want to lose at anything. And I think that's what drives them. So Kimi had been playing badminton with his friends, and he said to me, "Hey, let's play badminton." And I knew he'd been practicing with his friends because he wouldn't have asked me otherwise. And one of my very best friends is a guy called Kevin Scott, and he was the #1 Scottish badminton player. So I used to play badminton with him. So my level of playing against someone, of course, I got nowhere near him. Yeah. My badminton was nowhere near that good. But if you play with people at that level, you get better. So Kimi came with his friends. We played badminton, and I might have lost a couple of points, but they were just one after the other. I beat them all, and it was quite early when I was working with Kimi. I was in Finland with him, and I saw his mum a while afterwards, and she said, "What did you do to Kimi?" He came back and he threw his bag in the corner, slammed the door in his bedroom, and didn't want to. He said, "Don't disturb me," sort of thing. He was so pissed off he lost.
That's hilarious.
And he never told me this. I had it from his mum.
Yeah,
and then we didn't play badminton for a while. So then we played badminton again. He was like a different person. And he'd got some Finnish badminton player to play badminton with him. He practiced like crazy. And I'm like, Jesus Christ, I had to work. And I beat him still, but I had to really work at it.
Because the losing had hurt him so badly. Yeah.
And then he'd gone away and practiced and practiced and practiced. And then he still practiced in between all the games we played, to the point I couldn't beat him anymore. And I would try like crazy to beat him and couldn't. And then we started playing with Sebastian. So in Malaysia, there was a hotel we stayed at in KL. And there was a badminton hall next to it. And I think Kimi and Seb were chatting, and Kimi was talking about badminton. And he said, "Look, we can play here. Why don't we play together?" So there was myself and Kimi against Seb and his trainer. And then we just alternated around. And Seb got tonked. And myself and Kimi won the games. Kimi beat Seb, and it got to the point where Seb did not want to give up. He wanted to keep playing. And Kimi said to him, "I'll give you my Ferrari if you win."
What? His road car?
Yeah. and Seb was still playing and couldn't beat him. So
he kept the Ferrari.
So Kimi kept his Ferrari. And then what happened? Didn't hear anything from Seb and badminton for a while, until he said, "Do you want to play badminton?" And it's like a different person.
Same thing.
And he'd gone away and practiced and practiced and practiced.
Isn't that fascinating?
So it's one of these sort of things. These guys are so ultra competitive that if they're not good at something, they'll go and practice like crazy until they get better. And I think if you look at everyday life, how many people go through something and think, "Didn't quite nail that. Oh, never mind."
Yeah.
They don't practice. They come back, they don't nail it again, or they lose interest, or they don't think they're very good at it. Seb wasn't very good at badminton, but he got a damn sight better by practice. Kimi wasn't very good at badminton. I can't beat him anymore because he went away and practiced.
Fascinating, isn't it? Yeah, it's the not giving up at the first hurdle and realising that that's just a part of the journey. That's not the end of the journey, like we said before. But yeah, what a fascinating insight that they have that level of competitive streak. And, you're right. I don't know anyone that's achieved massive success without a load of hard work.
Yeah, sure.
There's not really any shortcuts, certainly not to sustain success. And I think F1 drivers and the story you've just told, exact example of it. Right, well, let's move it on, because you have spent that 28 years, or at least 26 of them, working with elite athletes, world champion drivers in Formula One. Today, that's not the case. You're still working in Formula One, but you're not working with elite athletes. You're now working with the people behind the scenes that make Formula One happen.
Yep.
And I'm interested to know, with everything we've just talked about from an elite perspective, how has that changed when you now have to go and train and coach and be a therapist for, look after a team of people who are not elite athletes? Have you had a lot of, I guess you must have a different reaction from those people?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, for me, it was a difficult transition because even before Formula One, I was working with elite athletes.
Yeah.
And elite athletes just built differently. And Stefano Domenicali was my team boss at Ferrari. And when Seb retired, I just went to say goodbye to Stefano because I didn't know when I would see him again.
Yeah.
And he said, "Hey, what are you doing next year?" And I said, "Oh, I'm talking to a few teams, a few drivers, nothing set." He's like, "Come and work for me." And I didn't really take him that seriously initially. And he called me on New Year, said, "Hey, Mark, Happy New Year. Are you going to come work for me?" and I then thought about it. I thought, well, yeah, why not? Okay. What's the sketch? He goes, "Oh, I'll put you in touch with my people and let's see if we can get some deal put together. But it'd be great to have you on board." And I went to, I think my first race was, Bahrain, I think was the first race of the season. So I went there. My God, it was such a transition. I mean, number one, being at a Formula One track, not working with a team or a driver was really weird.
Yeah.
Because that's all I've known for 26 years.
Whole new world.
And so it was like different from that perspective. And then you get to the track and I think the nice thing is it's very rewarding is the first thing I'd say. In the fact that when you're working with a Formula One driver, you're looking for that last 2% of improvement, those little incremental gains that will kind of try and improve what's happening just a fraction.
Yeah.
Because that can make all the difference. Working with normal people that have never really had anyone guiding them with nutrition, how to stay fit on the road with the training side of things, never had any sort of jet lag plan. You can make such a big difference with these people. Going in to look at the camera guys, I think number one, I never knew. You wouldn't even know half the stuff that happens behind the scenes. I had no clue there was a broadcast centre and how much stuff was in there.
It's a big operation,
It's
isn't
a
it?
huge operation. And going from looking after one guy to 300 plus travelling staff was like a major transition for me. But I think what was nice is just with the jet lag planning, people come out to me saying, "I never knew any of this."
So you're there to generally look after their well-being
It's
and
a
keep
well-being
them fit and
program.
healthy and operating at a high level.
Exactly. So I do most of like, so an overview, all of the jet lag planning and travel wellness stuff. So how to travel in a way that you're not going to get sick while you travel, how to arrive in the best shape possible in terms of jet lag time zone stuff. So everyone gets a jet lag program sort of specific to their flight to get out of all the long haul events.
So you create that bespoke for the different people travelling at different times and different routes and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yep. So not every single flight because we have so many people and some are on weird and wonderful routes. But if there are 4 different flights going out to Australia, some are with Emirates, some are with Singapore Airlines, I'll specifically design a plan for all of those. And just highlighting what are the issues with travel in terms of what causes the most problems. Dehydration on the flights is one of them. So the feedback I got from that was quite fascinating because no one even knew any of that stuff.
Yeah.
Looking at the camera guys, no one had really explained to them hydration, dehydration, core work. I mean, they're carrying like a 13, 17 kilo camera on one shoulder and all of the bodily issues that come with that. So working with them on the core work, on self-help preventative stuff. So in their camera garage, they have a mat, they have a foam roller, a massage gun, a massage ball. I've set up mobility programs for them that they've all taken on board.
And again, it's tailored to their role, their specific.
Yeah, very much so, because they've all got the same issues. So and then trying to clean up some of the stuff in the canteen to educate people on what they should be eating, what they should be drinking. Helping some of them just with kind of more personal things in terms of they're trying to lose weight or they're trying to get a little bit fitter. How do you kind of get fit while you're traveling the amount we've been traveling? How do you kind of set that up? You have to have a plan to do it because You don't always have time or access to a gym. So what can you do to kind of keep yourself fit and healthy on the road?
That is really interesting, because it's something that I know I find a challenge being on the road a lot. Yeah, a lot of hotels have a gym, but, you know, they're all different, and you have a different schedule at every place you turn up at. You sometimes have different time zones. I mean, how do you go about approaching this without getting into the exact specifics of each individual? What's the general plan here? Because you, as I said, the idea of looking at a driver, there's a lot of that's controllable. Their schedule is pretty much controllable to some extent, at least. You've got them for an extended period of time. There's a very specific goal in mind that you're aiming for a race, and you know when that's going to be or where it is. And with these people that you're working with now, there's a lot of them. They're all coming from different places. They're all doing different roles.
Yeah.
What's the general approach to that, to being fit and healthy whilst living a life that travels? Because a lot of people listening will have a similar type of life, I'm sure.
Sure, yeah. I mean, there's so many different ways you can look at it. I mean, some of it is nutrition. So a lot of people struggle when they travel outside of their normal environment. They get buffet breakfasts, and they're like, my God, and they eat so much.
Yeah.
And then they just eat more than they would normally eat.
That's so true.
And different stuff. Yeah. and people are like, I'm struggling to lose weight. And I saw what someone was eating for breakfast. I'm like, I'm not surprised.
So you're there with them at a lot of these hotels or these places?
Yeah, I mean, not with all of the people,
but
but with some. So for some people, it's just educational. And I think a lot of it is people sometimes overcomplicate things. And a lot of people think something has to be perfect, and a lot of times I just say to people, look, don't let perfection get in the way of progress. I mean, what's the best diet? It's the one you can stick to. Exercise timing. Someone said to me, oh, what time of day should I exercise? It's like, the time that you can.
Yeah.
It's like, don't worry too much about if it's in the evening, is it in the morning? Do it when you can fit it in. And then people sort of say, okay, but how do I train, and how do I start? It's like, walk. Go out and walk, get more steps in, just try and be more active.
It's a really good point, because I think people, and this is coming from an F1 background where you're trying to engineer the perfect everything, it doesn't always work like that, does it? Because you can look at it and say, well, I guess a little bit goes back to that sort of Kimi versus Sebastian Vettel approach. You know, Seb's looking for the ultimate gain in maximising every little detail. So, yeah, he might be looking for the optimum time to train and whatever else. Whereas Kimi's looking at the bigger steps, the bigger chunks of performance, or the most basics. And if you switch that over to life, when you're traveling with, say, work, for example, yeah, maybe there is an optimum time to train if you really get down to the finer details. Yeah. But if that doesn't work for you, you're just not going to do it. And then the cost is even greater.
It's 100% that. So what I try and get other people to do is similar to what I do myself. So it's I try and take everything I've done with a Formula One driver and then put it into a context where normal people can use it. So when people get off the flights, normally they're stiff and they're achy if you've been on a flight to Australia. So I set people up with mobility programs. Look, 10 minutes, run through these mobility programs and just give me your feedback, and then try and do them if you can for 10 minutes a day. And the feedback is amazing in terms of reduction in aches, pains, lower back issues. I train a lot myself with exercise bands. I'm very comfortable in gyms, trained in gyms all my life, but sometimes I just want to do a 15-minute something in the room. My hours are now worse than they used to be when I was working with the driver. So I'm at the track earlier, I leave later. So I carry a small bag that has got a load of exercise bands in and a couple of door anchors that I can hang behind a door and
I remember you gave those to us as the pit stop crew.
Exactly, yeah.
I still use the exercise bands now.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So I can do a workout in my room. And what's a workout? If you want to do a full body workout, you need to do something that pushes, something that pulls, something for your legs and something for the core. That covers pretty much everything, okay? Something that presses as well. You can do all of that with body weight or bands, and you just run it in a little routine, and it can take 15 minutes.
Without needing any specialist equipment.
Yeah, exactly. You don't need a gym. You don't need to go to the gym, which takes up time. And what I tend to do at the track, and this is just something that I've found valuable and I've been playing around with, is every hour I set an alarm. So it's between my treatment sessions and what I'm doing sort of at the race weekend. Every hour I do 20 push-ups. I do 20 sort of band pull downs or band pulls, depending on where I put my door anchor in my little office at the track.
Yeah.
I do 20 squats and 20 of something for the core every hour.
Wow, yeah.
So it takes no time. And I just do it throughout the day and I feel really good.
Yeah.
And I know I haven't got the time to do a full workout because of the timings of the day, but I can break it up and put it in throughout the day. And it works, like for me, it works really well. And trying to just show people that, okay, what times do you have available? Because everyone says I've got no time.
Yeah.
And it's always the first thing that comes out of people's mouths. You say, okay, what's your little phone telling you your screen time is? How much time do you spend on social media?
Yeah.
And you're telling me you haven't got 15 minutes? I mean, all that tells me is you're not prepared to work at something, because you're not prepared to sacrifice 15 minutes of watching Instagram for 16 minutes on your health.
It's always going to come down to that, isn't it? Because you've got to have a desire to want to achieve the thing you're working towards.
Exactly.
If you don't have that desire, and if the desire's not strong enough, you will just give up at the very first hurdle.
Yeah, very much so. And like I think if you look at fitness influencers, there are optimal ways to train every muscle in our body, but you don't have to be training every muscle optimally. You just have to be doing something. Like a push-up is a fantastic exercise. Putting a door anchor in and doing a pull down is a fantastic exercise. Are you optimizing your position? Maybe, maybe not, but does it really matter? You're doing something you weren't doing before. So I think just creating that kind of awareness to people and just saying, look, just start with something, dedicate a little bit of time to it. I can do the best workout in the world. If I only do it once, it ain't going to make much difference. If you can do a workout 100 times, be consistent. And I think being consistent is probably the best message, whether it's from a nutritional point of view, whether it's from an exercise point of view. If you can consistently do something to the point where it becomes a habit, then that's when you're going to get the most benefit.
It's a really good point. And to achieve that consistency, you have to have something that's not going to be knocked off track by you traveling or being in a different time zone.
For sure.
You know, I've turned up many times at a hotel in a far-flung place where the time zone's totally different and you're wide awake at 4 a.m, but the gym's not open.
Yeah.
So if you've got the exercise bands and the door anchors, it doesn't stop you, does it? So you can keep the consistency. Likewise, when you get home, you might be awake at 4 a.m. at home, gym's not open or whatever. You can keep that consistency going. So I'm a huge believer that consistency is key to pretty much everything.
Yeah, very much
everything you want to achieve.
Yeah, 100%.
What's been the reaction to people at FOM, at Formula One Management, to you coming in and starting to take care of their well-being? Obviously, I know the reaction, as you said, they've never had this before. So there's a lot of people that are fascinated to learn more and more. But are you seeing a reaction in terms of performance? Are you seeing differences being made, both physically, but also how people are performing in their roles?
It's a very good question. I think I don't directly see a lot of that because not everyone travels to every race.
Okay.
For the people that do, like the camera guys, I use them as an example, and I've noticed a big positive reaction there because no one likes to be dehydrated. No one likes to have issues with that sort of thing. Educating them and creating an understanding of what hydration is and what sort of things they should be doing and taking and providing that for them has made a noticeable difference. Working on them with like just looking at the asymmetries within their body with carrying a camera on one shoulder, what happens to all the other areas of their body, creating an understanding of that, creating core programs for them, creating the mobility programs to get rid of areas that were painful and make people aware of what they need to do to stay in that role longer, working on them on their health, seeing them lose weight, seeing them get stronger. That I've seen a direct sort of consequence of, and the people that take it on board, and most of the camera guys, the RF guys in the pit lane do, and they've all noticed big differences. So I think what's really nice is the messages I got at the end of last year from helping some of these guys were amazing, and I think that's the rewarding part of my job. I think I'm doing the basics, but for these people it's kind of like something that for them is new, and it's making a difference in their life. I think with the travel stuff as well, you're never going to get everyone looking at a jet lag program and following everything, but at the end of the day there's probably 9 stages to traveling. If you only do 4 of them well, you're still going to feel better at the other end. And there's going to be people that go to the lounge and have their beer or have their champagne, and you might never change that mentality with those people. But speaking to sort of one of our guys in Australia, he's like, Mark, I followed your program. I'm meeting someone at 9 o'clock tonight for dinner. I don't have any jet lag. This is really weird. and for people that do follow it through, I mean, again, everyone's individual. and you have to kind of fine tune things a little bit to you as an individual and take the parts that work.
Yeah.
But there's been some amazing results for the people that do sort of embrace these sort of things. And I think, like I say, that's what's rewarding for me. I think it's seeing that reaction and hearing these stories. And like I say, people have pain and they have problems. I think there's a lot of people that have problems that you can tell straight away they're not prepared to do much themselves to get rid of it. But for those that follow what you tell them to do, have them come back and say, my God, I feel so much better, is again super rewarding.
Yeah.
So,
we're coming towards the end here. I just want to get, you touched on this the travel plan, which I know is a huge part of what you do now within Formula One, but also outside. Can we get a sort of, without getting too specific, a very rough guide for somebody who travels a lot on business, for example, maybe to another time zone, let's say it's the US, where there's a big shift in time zone. And in doing so, typically we're all exposed to free drinks on an aeroplane or a lounge bar or whatever. It's very easy to be tempted by this stuff, particularly in the travel, industry. So a very brief overview of somebody who has to travel on business frequently. How can they plan a few basic things that might minimize the negative impact of things like jet lag, but also the idea of lack of sleep and nutrition that come with this intense shift in time zones?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously lots that can be done. I think if I look at what I've done for a Formula One driver, what I set up for the F1 guys, a lot of that planning starts before you even leave. So if you really want to go to where it really starts with what I used to do with Kimi, for example, you look at the planes you fly on, because the Dreamliner, the A350, they're better planes to fly on than some of the older models, just because there's more humidity in the cabin. Okay. You don't get quite so dehydrated.
Oh, really? And, so you look into that. You look at which route is flying a certain type of aircraft.
Exactly. And if you can tap into one of these planes, you're going to improve things straight away without having to do anything else.
So people are looking for what, a Dreamliner or what?
A350.
A350, yeah. the big ones.
The big ones, yeah. So they're like, that's the first thing I would look at. And then, so if you can get a routing that has one of those sort of aircraft, great. I'm looking for direct flights, ideally, because it's much easier to plan the jet lag program, unless you're going to stop over somewhere proper to stop and have access to sort of, gym, spa, restaurant. So the direct flights are important. In terms of planning, I would start 3 days before the travel, adjusting to the time zone that you're going to. So, for example, if you're flying west to the US, you want to be going to bed later at night, getting up later in the morning. And working with Formula One drivers, that was always possible because their schedule is quite flexible. Yeah. With normal, everyday people are going to say, I've got kids waking up, I can't do it. And like I say, that's just life. So what I'm suggesting might not be possible or optimal. Going east, you do the opposite, go to bed earlier, get up earlier. So for that, it might be a little bit easier for some people to fit into their schedule. But if you can start adjusting your time zone to the destination you're going to, like with Kimi, it was very easy. He loved ice hockey. So I could get him to watch ice hockey. Watch ice hockey till 3 a.m. Just don't get up until midday. He was great at it. So going to the US was a doddle. He hardly had any jet lag. So if you can make those sort of shifts in your body clock already before you go, you're going to help. And that's when you get light as well as when you're asleep and awake. So you use light and sleep in terms of your times before you travel to the destination.
So you're trying to expose yourself to light in the time zone that you're aiming for.
Yeah, because what you want to try and do is adjust the way your body releases melatonin before you get to your destination. So when you get light, when you try and restrict light in relation to that sleep-wake cycle. The next thing I'd look at is the actual flights themselves. So there's quite a few different, I've tried everything in 26 years. Yeah. So you read all sorts of weird and wonderful research and reports, and I just try it all. So I think on the flights, one of the biggest things is dehydration. So the humidity level on a plane is so low, it's like being in a desert. So it literally just sucks all of the sort of fluid or moisture out of the body. So staying hydrated is really important.
So not drinking loads of alcohol.
Or coffee, because they're two of the things that do sort of... And if you are going to do that, you just need to drink more water to compensate for it. Add some electrolytes into that maybe to help your body sort of absorb the water. And talking to airline pilots, some of them focus literally just on the hydration as a way to help with the negative impacts of the flying. So I think that's a big part of it. I think the nutrition side of things, planes aren't renowned for their high quality food. It's a lot of processed food, and for sure, certain airlines are better than others. The cabin you fly in will help.
Yeah.
But you also want to match the food with your destination time. So if you're going to, I don't know, the Middle East, for example, you want to be eating lunch at their lunchtime.
Yeah,
you don't want to be eating dinner at breakfast time or something out of sync.
Which is a hard thing to do because the airlines tend to feed you on the sort of departure time zone.
Yeah, and a lot of time it's completely out of sync with where you want to go. So so a lot of the time you got to understand what is the time where I'm going.
Yeah.
Is it the middle of the night, in which time I don't really want to be eating? And sometimes like that's when you should be sleeping.
Yeah.
So I sort of kit the guys out, okay, you got to have your eye mask, you got to have the earplugs, because you want to be sleeping when there's a meal service.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are going to be eating, there's going to be light, there's going to be noise, but that's when you need to be asleep, and try and sleep for this period of time if you can. And then this is the time when you could eat. So they probably won't be serving the food on the plane then. But the good thing is places like Pret a Manger, which are in most airports now, offer a healthy option that you can take on the plane.
Yeah.
So when I set the jet lag program up for a lot of people in F1, I'm like, look, go to buy something healthy that you can have at these times. Number one, you can control the timing of it, and you know it's good quality food. That's
a really good point. Yeah, it's one of the hardest things. I often struggle with that. And you're right, just buying something healthy where you've got control over, on an airline, you don't often know what's coming.
Sure.
And it's highly likely to not be that great. So if you can, spend a few quid and buy something, a sandwich or a salad or whatever beforehand, you've introduced an element of control into this whole process.
Yeah, very much so. And I think it's worked very well for a lot of people, because again, a lot of people don't think about that. And there's some people like New York flight. I mean, I've seen people go to the lounge in New York, have a meal, have a few drinks, get on the plane, and it's a short flight, like 6.5 hours, and then they stay awake for the meal service.
Yeah.
And then they have like 2 hours sleep, and of course they're going to feel like crap when they get to the other end.
I think there's a feeling, because I've felt this in the past, and today I've followed a lot of your advice with my travel schedules, and I actually do a lot of what you're saying now. But in the past, I think there was always a feeling, for me at least, of if you ever get access to a lounge, if you're lucky enough to either fly business or you've got a loyalty scheme that gets you in there, it's all free. So you want it, you're not going to pass it up.
Yeah,
and then you get on the plane and there's another free meal and some more free drinks. So
And people eat what's put in front of them.
Exactly right. Yeah.
But it's but no, so it's I think controlling all of that and creating a plan for that before you fly. I mean, I list all of this out and tell people the optimum sort of eating windows and give people options. But then what do you do when you get to the other end? Like I say, I would, with a driver, run through a mobility program, because you're going to feel a bit stiff and achy and crappy when you get off the plane at the other end. So run through this mobility program, head to toe, takes 10, 12 minutes, and you're just unwinding your body from that travel. Hydrate as soon as you get to the other end. So you want to again focus on that hydration side of things. And depending on what time you land, the best thing you can do is go out in the fresh air and walk, do a little bit of a jog. Like I say, some form of exercise helps you get over that sort of travel.
Yeah, that is all brilliant, really brilliant advice. It's as I say, I've been employing some of that advice over the last couple of years on your with your help, and it's transformed the way I travel. I think I said to you recently, I started doing, when I went to Australia, I shifted my time zones. I talked to you beforehand, you gave me a bit of advice and a program, and it worked a treat. I flew all the way to Australia and I had almost zero jet lag. And there was a cost in the week building up to the first flight. You know, I was up at silly times and it was difficult in terms of managing family life. But I knew that when I got to Australia, I had to go straight into work.
Sure,
and so I needed to be on my A game, you know, immediately, which is a very difficult thing to do after such a long travel period, but it worked a treat. So,
yeah, for sure. Well, it's great it did, and it's great you followed it. Well done. I think, but that's the key, isn't it? Is what have you got to do at the other end? You look at like mechanics in F1. You get to the other end and you've got to go straight in, and you've got to build a car that someone's going to drive at 200 plus miles an hour around a track. You want to make sure that car's built properly, there's no mistakes. So it's that human performance element at the other end. Like business person, you've got to go straight into a meeting. You want to be sharp.
Of course.
Your business meeting might determine a big sale or a no sale, and you want to be on your A game, like you said. So
it comes down to what you prioritise as being the most important thing. And I know we've got to wrap this up, but I know that, alongside all of these years of working with drivers and now working with Formula One in this elite industry that is F1, you've done so much work and learned so much, you've studied so much, you've figured a lot of stuff out by just doing it. And I know that you're, as well as working in this space, you're now working with hotels, the hotel industry. And I know that you've developed a sort of supplement sachet, which is really helpful in a lot of this stuff. I've tried it. I use it now on long haul flights. So just before we go, tell us where that came from and what it is and how it might help.
Yeah, sure. So when I was working with Kimi, he had his kids, and the immune system is super important. So when we're traveling around the world, what's now 24 races, how do you, number one, sort out all of the jet lag thing, but how do you keep someone healthy in that environment? We're traveling through airports where we're exposed to so many bugs and bacteria from so many different people, from so many different countries. You need to make sure the immune system is strong enough to fight against all of the bugs and bacteria that you're going to be exposed to. So Kimi had the kids. Obviously, kids go to school. Kids bring back a lot of bugs from school, and Kimi started getting sick a few times. And a sick driver isn't a particularly quick driver, so I was like, my God, okay, I've got to do something to kind of counteract this, because everything we're doing at the minute obviously isn't enough. So I sat down with the biochemist that I work with that creates the supplements. So with Kimi, just very quickly, we do very detailed blood, urine, stool analysis, one good DNA test, and then we create a nutritional plan based on all of that. So we can see everything that's going on in a driver's body. If anything's out of balance, whether that be a vitamin or whatever it might be, the first thing we try and do is correct it with real food. So we'll change the nutritional program. We'll introduce different foods to try and correct that naturally. But there were lots of supplements I had tailor-made for Kimi by my biochemists. So some were focused on focus and concentration, some were focused on sleep. There was a recovery product that we used after every training session, after every driving session, and there was also something that I wanted for the flights that was hydration and immune system combined, because for me on the flights the two biggest challenges are staying hydrated and the immune system support, because I couldn't afford for Kimi to get sick. So when he started having the issues with the kids, I sat down with Rob, my biochemist, and said, look, I need you to design me the best supplement possible for hydration and immune system support in one package. And he's like, yeah, okay, I can do that. What's the budget? I'm like, limitless. Kimi's paying. I just need the bloody thing to work. So Kimi said he just wants it to work. Use the best ingredients. So I want you to go away and formulate something that has the highest quality ingredients in doses that are scientifically proven to work. I want it to work on the gut. I want it to work on the immune system. I want it to focus on the hydration. Gave him the full spec. And he's like, my God, I've worked for all these supplement companies in the past, and they've always told me you can spend X, and I've got to try and formulate something.
The beauty of Formula One.
Exactly, yes. So he went away with like, okay, and just created the ultimate travel supplement for me. So I kind of like chipped in a few things that I thought would be good to add in, but he's the genius at formulating all of this sort of stuff. So I used that with Kimi, and he just didn't get sick. And okay, we were focused on the nutritional plan, obviously the training, but the driving, the training, it also knocks the immune system. So from an immune system point of view, like I say, you try and hit it with everything, but it was hard to know, was it the supplement that was creating this positive effect, or was it just the fact you try and do everything perfectly and Kimi had built up some defense to the kids coming back with the different bugs? So I used it with Kimi for maybe 9 years. And then I thought, look, this has worked so well for him. I want to introduce this to the other people in Formula One and with the hotel partners I work with, because obviously they have travelers coming in from all these different places. So I got Rob to create the same thing for me, but in a sachet form for F1 and for hotels. And the feedback was amazing. And I had people coming up to me that were just sort of feeling a bit ropey. I'll give them a sachet. They come in the next day. My God, they were hugging me saying, I feel so much better. But on the flights, like the just normal people traveling in business class, the sort of riggers that come and set everything up, they were like, my God, I felt brand new coming off the flight.
I can attest to that. I've used it. It feels great.
And it's also, honestly, the
great hangover cure, by the way. Well, not a cure, but, it helps.
It's hydration.
It helps.
Dehydration is a big problem with the hangover. But great, it works for that as well. It's probably a bigger market.
Yeah.
But no, so honestly, the feedback was so nice to hear, because you never know whether something's going to work or not.
Yeah.
And I had all of these people sort of giving me all of this positive feedback. And from the hotel point of view, it was working very well. From the F1 point of view, it was working very well. And we had so many people. Everyone I gave it to was like, where can I buy this? And I'm like, you can't. I only supply F1 and the hotel partners. So I'm looking to launch it more as a B2C thing now. So and it's a learning experience. It's like everything else. I've got an amazing sort of supplement. It's in a sachet form, but it's not in a box.
Yeah.
So I need to get a box of 20 or whatever else. And it's just going through that process, finding the boxing company and packaging it all up and creating that sort of whole sales process that someone can just order it and get it delivered. It's like a learning experience going through all of that. So,
well, you'll get there, and as I said, it's a great product that I can tell a difference when I've had it. So I mean, I wish you the very best luck. How can people find you when you are ready to start selling it? What should they go and follow?
I think for sure I'll put it on my Instagram account. I'm not very good with Instagram. I've had a bit of an Instagram break, which has actually been really nice as a social media break. But I've been preparing a lot more stuff for social media. I'm having a complete revamp of my website where that supplement's going to be highlighted there. So
what's the web address and the Instagram handle? Yeah, you're right. You need to do a bit of work on your social media. I'll tell you what, we'll put it in the description.
We'll put it in the description, yeah.
Brilliant. Well, listen, mate, it will be a success. Like everything else you've set your mind to over these years, you've transformed an industry to some extent, and certainly been at the leading edge of transforming that. As you said, all those years ago, the kind of stuff we're talking about now didn't exist. And I know that you've been at the cutting edge of developing that, initially, obviously, for the drivers. But the fact that those 3 drivers you worked with have become world champions, you've played a part in that. There is no doubt.
Yeah, I think with Seb, I have to have an exception. He won 4 before I even got there.
Okay, yeah,
so
right. We'll give Seb his credit.
I can't claim credit.
But, I know, because I've seen it up close and personal, that the impact that you have in this busy team environment of a Formula One organisation, with the likes of Mika, with Kimi especially, I've seen what impact it has on those people. So I don't think the trainers, as is often the case with many people in Formula One, they don't get the credit they deserve behind the scenes. But, I want to give you that credit. I think you've done an amazing job. You're a top man, and I'm really pleased that you came on the show today.
Hey, thank you very much, mate. Appreciate it. And always great to come and see you.
Thanks.